Canada is often praised for being a land of abundance. Endless forests, fresh water, and most famously, oil. But here's the paradox. A country sitting on the third largest oil reserves on Earth, bigger than Iraq, Iran, or Kuwait, still imports gasoline and diesel from abroad. Even stranger, much of its crude is shipped to the United States at a discount, refined there and sometimes sold right back to Canadians at full price. So why can't a country this rich in oil refine its own fuel and keep the profits at home? Well, it turns out the answer lies deep beneath the surface, not just in economics, but in geography, climate, and politics. Before we dig in, if you're enjoying this kind of global deep dive, go ahead and hit like and share. It really helps the channel reach more people interested in stories like this. Now, let's unravel Canada's oil paradox. The first thing to understand is that Canada's oil isn't like the slick, light crude that gushes from the deserts of Saudi Arabia or the shale fields of Texas. Nearly 97% of Canada's reserves come from the oil sands of northern Alberta. And this is not normal oil. It's a thick, tar-like substance called bitumen, so dense it barely flows. Imagine cold molasses mixed with sand, that's what they're dealing with. Extracting it is a monumental task. Massive trucks scoop it out by the ton, or steam is injected underground to melt it free. Both methods burn through huge amounts of energy and money, and the challenge doesn't stop there. Once extracted, bitumen is too heavy to travel through pipelines. To make it flow, companies dilute it with lighter oil and creating dilbit. But that means nearly a third of every barrel shipped isn't actually oil. It's just diluent. So right off the bat, transportation becomes expensive and inefficient. When it finally reaches a refinery, another wall appears. Bitumen is one of the dirtiest, heaviest crudes on the planet, full of sulfur and metals. To process it, you need highly specialized refineries with advanced cokers and hydrocrackers. Only a handful of refineries in the world are built for that, and most of them are not in Canada. They're in Texas and Louisiana, originally designed for heavy oil from Venezuela and Mexico. Canada, on the other hand, has about 15 smaller refineries. Most were built decades ago for lighter, easier crude. Altogether, they can process around 1.9 million barrels a day, while Canada produces more than twice that amount. So even if every refinery ran at full speed, more than half the oil would still need to be exported. And that's exactly what happens, exported south to the US. Now here's where the economics turn ugly. Because Canada has only one major buyer, the United States, it has very little leverage in pricing. American refineries dictate the value, creating what's called the Western Canadian Select Differential. That means Canadian crude often sells for $20 to $30 less per barrel than world prices. It's like selling champagne at beer prices, just because the buyer next door controls the bar. And after refining that oil, some of it finds its way back north, sold to Canadians at full market rates. This economic loop traps Canada, oil-rich yet dependent on others to capture the real value. The obvious question then, why not just build more refineries in Canada? That's where geography steps in. And it's brutal. The oil sands are in northern Alberta, a remote, landlocked region surrounded by frozen forest, muskeg, and permafrost. The nearest big cities, Edmonton and Calgary, are hundreds of kilometers away. The nearest ocean? Over 1,000 kilometers behind mountain ranges and rocky shield. Refineries, however, need to be near their customers. Gasoline and diesel are far more dangerous and expensive to move than crude oil. That's why most refineries around the world sit near ports or population hubs, places like Houston, Rotterdam, or Singapore. But almost 90% of Canadians live near the US border, far from the oil sands. Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, all thousands of kilometers away. So whether you build a refinery near the oil or near the cities, you face astronomical transport costs either way. Build near the oil and you'll spend a fortune shipping finished fuel south. Build near the cities and you'll spend a fortune piping crude north first. Either direction, you lose money before production even starts. And it's not just distance. The land itself fights back. The Rockies block the west, the Canadian Shield makes the east almost impenetrable, and the north is frozen half the year. To the south, the US already dominates refining with massive, efficient plants on its Gulf Coast. So geography doesn't just make refining difficult, it makes it almost impossible to justify financially. Then there's market size. Canada's population is only around 40 million. The US? About 335 million. A modern refinery costs between $5 and $10 billion to build. To pay that back, you need constant, large-scale demand for gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. But Canada's entire market for refined fuels is roughly 2 million barrels a day, 1/10 the size of the US. So even if Canada built a brand new refinery, it would need to export to make it profitable. But that's easier said than done. The US doesn't need Canadian gasoline. It already produces more than enough. Shipping refined products overseas is expensive, and Canada would be competing against the massive Gulf Coast refineries that have economies of scale and prime access to global ports. And this is what economists call the geography trap. Oil in the wrong place, people too far away, and not enough access to the world's markets. Speaking of markets, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think Canada should invest in new refining capacity anyway? Maybe as a long-term energy security move? Or is geography simply too much to overcome? Drop your thoughts down in the comments. I read everyone, and I'm curious where you stand. Now, geography isn't the only villain here. The climate adds another layer of cost. Building anything in northern Alberta is expensive, but refineries, they're massive. In winter, temperatures drop to -30 or even -40 degrees Celsius. At that point, concrete won't cure, steel becomes brittle, and machinery literally freezes. Workers can't stay outside for long. Construction slows to a crawl for months. So a refinery that might take 3 years to build in Texas could take 5 in Alberta, adding years of extra financing and interest. And once it's up and running, it's still not smooth sailing. Everything needs insulation and constant heating just to stay functional. Maintenance costs skyrocket. Energy bills soar. Some estimates say running a refinery in Alberta costs 20 to 30% more than in Texas, purely because of the cold. Even demand is seasonal. People drive less in winter, agriculture slows, and diesel use drops. Refineries, though, prefer steady year-round demand. That mismatch makes profitability harder still. And finally, the pipeline politics. Because Canada's oil is landlocked, pipelines are the lifelines that determine who can buy it. For decades, almost all of it flowed south into the United States. Attempts to reach the Pacific or Atlantic coasts have faced fierce opposition. Energy East, canceled in 2017. Northern Gateway, canceled in 2016. The Trans Mountain expansion to Vancouver took over a decade and ballooned from $7 billion to $30 billion before finally opening in 2024. Even with that, exporting refined products is still a challenge, because Asian buyers prefer to import crude and refine it themselves. They have massive, efficient refineries. So again, Canada ends up shipping raw crude while others capture the added value. And that's really the core of the story. It's not that Canada lacks technology, money, or expertise. It's that geography dictates the economics. Oil trapped in remote, frozen regions far from markets. A small population concentrated on the southern edge. High construction and operating costs. Pipelines mired in politics. Meanwhile, the United States enjoys a huge domestic market, warm climate, global ports, and refineries perfectly suited for Canada's heavy crude. So Canada ships it south, the US refines it, and sometimes Canadians buy it back at a premium. It's the classic model of a resource colony. Export raw materials cheap, import finished products expensive. Economists call it the resource curse, when having too much of one resource actually limits a country's broader prosperity. So the real question is, can Canada ever break out of this trap? Technological advances might help. Shifts in global demand might create new openings, but geography, that's permanent. Canada's oil wealth is both a blessing and a burden. It shows that natural abundance doesn't automatically equal economic advantage. What truly matters is where your resources are, how you can move them, and who controls the means to turn them into value. And in Canada's case, the geography wins. If you found this breakdown insightful, hit like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss future videos like this. It really supports the channel and keeps these deep dive analyses coming. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.